Could US President Joe Biden be about to drop all of the criminal charges against Wikileaks founder Julian Assange? The US President has given his strongest hint so far that the US government may be about to discontinue the case against Mr Assange, allowing him to be freed from Belmarsh Prison in London. Welcome to my channel, Andy on Crime, where I talk about high-profile criminal cases and other aspects of criminal law. To briefly recap this long-running saga, Julian Assange is currently incarcerated at Belmarsh Prison, where he is being held on remand pending the outcome of his final appeal against his extradition to the United States, where he is facing charges relating to the disclosure of classified documents and is facing decades in prison if he were to be convicted. Now, in April of 2022 at Westminster Magistrates Court, the Chief Magistrate, Paul Goldspring, approved Assange's extradition to the US, and the case was referred to the then Home Secretary Priti Patel. She then granted final approval for Julian Assange's extradition on the 17th of June 2022. Julian Assange is now appealing against that decision, and having failed in previous appeals, he is now on his final appeal, which, if the appeal fails, he is likely to be extradited to the US. Now, last month, a court adjourned the appeal hearing to allow the US government to give assurances that Mr Assange would not face the death penalty if he is subsequently convicted of the charges that he faces. Prior to that hearing, the Australian government had called for Julian Assange's case to come to a conclusion, and I previously did a video about that, which I'll put a link in the description if you want to see it. But in essence, the Australian Parliament passed a motion voting 86 to 42 that Mr Assange should be allowed to return to Australia, and I explained at the time how this vote had no legal bearing on the case in relation to UK law. He was still being held on remand lawfully pending the outcome of the extradition hearing. But what that motion was designed to do was to put political pressure on both the UK and the US to discontinue the investigation and the case against Julian Assange. Now, US President Joe Biden has said that he is considering a request from Australia to drop the prosecution of Julian Assange. Now, the US, as I've stated, want to extradite Mr Assange on criminal charges relating to the disclosure of classified materials. Mr Assange has continually denied any wrongdoing, stating that he is a political prisoner and that he is being prosecuted for simply being a journalist. Now, US President Joe Biden was asked about Australia's request on Wednesday, stating that we're considering it when asked whether or not they would consider dropping the case against Mr Assange. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that President Biden's comments were encouraging and that he was incredibly optimistic about an outcome, telling Sky News Australia that we want Mr Assange to be able to return home. Now, the current state of affairs is that whilst this decision is being considered by the US, the appeals process that is currently ongoing in the UK will continue at the High Court, and the High Court is due to evaluate any response from the US in relation to the assurances that they are seeking in relation to the death penalty, and the case is likely to come back before the court in May. And as it currently stands, with the US not yet taking any position in relation to dropping the case, if that appeal fails for Julian Assange, then subject to the US having a change of mind, which they're currently considering, Julian Assange will have exhausted all avenues of appeal against his extradition, and there will be nothing stopping him from being extradited to the US to face those criminal charges.